Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. Huge swathes of Australia have been hit by massive floods recently, and that follows years of drought and unprecedented bushfires. But how has this all impacted small businesses? And are you prepared for the worst? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Bruce Bilson is Australia's small business and family enterprise Ombudsman. He's just finished a tour of regional Australia to survey how small businesses are coping. And he's found that many businesses need to do more to plan and prepare. Bruce Bilson starts by explaining to Jeff Waters why his regional tour was necessary.
Well, Jeff, we thought about the impact disasters were having on regional economies and on the small businesses either operating within them or dependent on them. And we'd seen a number of these over recent years and suggested to government a close examination of the small business experience in the context of natural disasters was worthwhile. We then thought, well, where's the most useful contribution we can make? And that preparedness and resilience space seemed to be where we could offer most value, look at the kind of information that's available to businesses, knowing that a lot of businesses are more instinctive, they're not terribly deeply planned enterprises, and then what could we do to sort of encourage people to think through a more resilient lens on what might knock their business off track from where they'd like it to be. So that was the motivation for it. 36 community consultations later, a couple of thousand people we surveyed to gauge their wisdom and insight and to look at what we could do to improve the way government engaged, others engaged, the private sector, learnings from leading thinkers in this space, and then, what we could do to encourage small and family business to pick up some of those best insights.
Just in a general sense, what sort of areas did you go to?
Well, we went from tip to tip, actually. We were up in far north Queensland, where the natural disaster experience is cyclones, through New South Wales, where bushfires and floods were very much on people's minds. Obviously, the pandemic was a frame that brought a lot of other insights, through Victoria mainly into the bushfire impacted areas, down to Tasmania where they've had some flood events, and also over to South Australia where flood and bushfire were the primary experiences, particularly on Kangaroo Island where you'd recall the bushfire impact that was devastating for that community. So that was the spread. Kept us busy. We had a very tight time frame, but it was just remarkable how look, it was humbling to hear people talk about their stories and their experiences and to show the personal resilience that we're seeing these enterprising men and women really get up off the canvas to go again in their business. And in some cases, Jeff, often hit with another disaster, whether it's another natural event or just when they were feeling like they were getting wind in their sails, along comes coronavirus, and then that had a big impact on their businesses as well.
So what did these regional small business people have to tell you about their resilience?
Well, you can imagine it was pretty vivid, and there were no holds barred. For some, it was a story of knowing the environment within which they operated, some experience as well. We heard some really compelling case studies out of northern Queensland where even the community does Cyclone Saturday in the lead up to the cyclone season, just to remind people about the environment they live in and what preparedness looks like for their business or even in their private lives. We were learning about, the frequency of flood events in Lismore and how local knowledge had really come to the fore in people trying to adapt to those circumstances. And then, too often, I might say, people sharing a view that they wish they'd known something they know now before the event came, and even working with rural financial counselling service providers to map out what the path forward looked like. Clearly, resilience and preparedness after an event is hopefully factored into what the future looks like. And again, there was a common call for people wishing they'd known things before that they know now off the back of some experience. I guess, Jeff, the other thing too was this codependency theme. A lot of businesses pointed to being able to count on, learn from, partner with other businesses and their local community. So, we were talking about socio-commercial capital as a way of describing that. Social capital you often hear talked about in a broader community sense, but bringing that into the local business community where there was a fraternity of enterprising men and women learning from each other, sharing insight, sharing wisdom, sharing experience, and then through that really helping their peers find a way forward and to be best placed to recover from a disaster, heaven forbid, if one should come their way.
So those social networks certainly sound important.
Yeah, it was. It was really a strong standout, Jeff. I mean, there was discussions around, I suppose, capacity building. If I could put it this way, the aha moments where people were listening to and learning from their peers about what had worked for them. And we heard this time and time again. In Lismore was about how you build your structures to anticipate a flood, mindful and respectful of the most recent floods being nothing anyone had ever contemplated. But there was this conversation within the business community about how those that have been through it before are now better prepared. They choose different kinds of building materials. They stock their premises in a different way. They have a contingency plan that they activate to preserve key assets in their business. And they said, look, then the newbies would come in and put gyprock on the ground floor, not knowing that as soon as a flood event happened, it was gone. Whereas the more seasoned business leaders there were saying, no, we put these materials, we anticipate there'll be a flood, we know this material will survive, we can hose it out as the water recedes and then be ready to go in a couple of days. And it was really quite remarkable. But even in other areas, how some people had found insurance when others were struggling, what sort of mitigation steps they took that convinced the broker to go in hard for them. Was that sort of stuff, Jeff, that was, really part of that socio-commercial capital where businesses were learning from and aiding other businesses as part of this journey?
Mazars is an international audit, tax and advisory firm committed to helping clients confidently build and grow their businesses. Experience a new perspective with Mazars. Visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
In a general sense, do you get the feeling that small businesses are prepared for crises?
Look, the survey suggested about half are and about half aren't. So much of the survey results, Jeff, pointed to recent experience or knowing someone who's been through an event as being a key catalyst for people stopping to think about, well, what does that mean potentially for my business? Even thoughts around having some described it, a bit of a kitty, cash reserve to help with recovery activity. Some others talked about having a checklist of vital people they need to call, what's their broker's number, what's key bits of data that they've stored in a place that they'll need to rely upon, what mitigation steps they may have taken. And it seems for those that have had more experience or more exposure, yes, that preparedness level is up. For those for whom a disaster event, and if I could put this into the mix, Jeff, it doesn't always have to be a natural disaster. If you and I were the key income generating talent in a business, having us taken out through illness or accident or travel or some other event can be quite disastrous as well. And so we're trying to have people thinking about, what's my business future look like? What are the things that might knock me off track from where I'd like to be? And what sort of steps can I take to mitigate the impact or harm, but put me in the best position I can be to steer the business through and then see recovery on the other side? The big one, though, was, let's say, Bruce, it's normally a disaster and we can count on 5 or 6 years before something else comes along to get us into good shape. A number of the people we spoke with, Jeff, they were fatigued. They'd felt like it was a rolling disaster mode that they'd been operating in, and they're just exhausted. Not only were the cash reserves in their business, was that an empty bucket, but their own personal, emotional resilience had been strained and tested, and it was just remarkable to see the preparedness to get up and to go again.
Another aspect of being resilient and being prepared is your own mental health, I imagine.
Yeah, you're spot on. And that came up quite a bit, Jeff, interestingly, just about people feeling that they were in the best place they could be to steer the business through these challenges. And we know running a business is a big responsibility at the best of times. You throw these things in, it represents an enormous challenge. And a number spoke of the need to reach out and get some support just so they're in a good place to be able to provide that business leadership. Mindful, many of the business leaders are community leaders as well. So when a disaster hits, the expectation on them may well reach well beyond their own enterprise, their own team, their own workforce, and their own families into playing leading roles in the community's response. So that came up as well.
Just finally, where are you at with the survey at the moment?
Well, the survey's done and dusted, Jeff. We've over 2,000 respondents, good representation across the country, including from places that were a little hard to travel to, which at the time included Western Australia and the Northern Territory, but a good cross-section of people's thinking, where they get trusted information from, who they feel they can count on, and I suppose what role preparedness and resilience in a disaster lens plays in their business life. It's very much a matter of working on the business, not just in the business. And this is for some of the people surveyed, and they're so flat out just dealing with the day-to-day, they might not think about it, might not be front of mind, and when it does occur, it's like, well, heck, let's just instinctively navigate it, versus others that were really thinking through, well prepared and pretty well equipped to sort of navigate the impact and recover as best they can.
That was Bruce Bilson, the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.